Thank you. Yes, and this is actually a talk combining areas of array languages and also quantum computing. So what we're going to show here is that this notion of gate fusion in quantum can kind of be modeled using the traditional map fusion as is known from the array community. This is joint work with Troels Henriksen, also at DECO. So this context here is about state vector quantum simulators and some approach that we have taken to try to implement such a simulator in the Futhark data parallel language. And it turns out that when you look at these simulators, they're pretty much all imperative in nature. They kind of operate on a global state vector of size 2 to the k, where k is kind of the number of qubits you compute on. And you have this explosion in the state vector due to these notions of entanglement and so on. I'll get back to that later. What you'll see in these imperative simulators is that the precise access and update patterns that are used to implement the simulators, they're quite advanced, and they work by using various kind of bit operations to compute the addresses inside the state vector. And then it turns out that the notion of gate fusion is quite important for performance. What we can see over here is a picture of a quantum circuit with 4 qubits, numbered from 0 to 3. And then you have these different kind of gates. I'll come back to those in a moment. But what you in particular can see is that there are certain gates that just occurs in kind of in isolation and can be grouped, the T, H, and X group, X gate down there. And they're kind of, it's kind of possible that those can be fused into kind of one gate. And this is what we want to see, whether that, how that can be modeled using a simple map fusion. So our contribution here is that we're going to use well-known concept of something called vectorization. It's basically just the notion of column stacking, where there's a relation between this column stacking and then the Kronecker product of performing the Kronecker product of two matrices. And then we'll demonstrate also that gate operations become index transformed maps, and then gate fusion becomes map fusion. Of course, this area, we are not going to claim here that we are going to do the state-of-the-art performance in quantum simulators. There's a lot of work out there, and they kind of set the bar for quantum supremacy. When do quantum algorithms actually, when do you actually need quantum computers to actually solve real problems, and when can you just do with simulators? So of course, if you can simulate some algorithms, then or some problems, then you won't need real quantum hardware, right? And there's a lot of related work in that area. So just to show a little bit quantum here, this breakdown of classical reasoning, the double beam splitter example. Here we have kind of a situation drawn here by this picture here, where we have a source of electrons, these photons that are beamed into these beam splitters. The beam splitters here are shown here, and then you have mirrors up there. And the idea is that the classical reasoning breaks down once you add these beam splitters. So you have a beam coming in here. Half of the electrons will kind of go through. If you look at it probabilistically, half of them go up. That will be kind of the classical interpretation. And then you have mirrors here, and they will come back here, meet another beam splitter, and then you would kind of envision that half of them would then go up and be detected here, and half of them here. This would be if you had a probabilistic view on how this would work. The problem is that this is just not how physics work. What you'll see when you do this experience is that they all come out and be measured here in this particular detector here. And that means that it kind of, the classical reasoning breaks down, the probabilistic reasoning. And instead we can model it using quantum mechanics, where a model where the beam splitters model using these Hadamard gates, and they are basically complex matrices here that are unitary. We'll come back to that a little bit. But what you see here is basically that you can model the image here with having two Hadamard gates in sequence, the two beam splitters. And what you then see is that they multiply out and they end up being the identity, meaning that you will basically have the ray just going out. And in principle, what you can see, the interpretation is then that each electron here, each photon, is basically both going that way and that way. And when they meet again here, they will basically go this way. This is how you have to interpret, and you cannot like use a probabilistic model. So just to set up a little bit more here, we talk about these qubits. They are modeled here as two-dimensional complex vectors. They specify this linear combination, and then we have these basis vectors, 0 and 1, using this Dirac notation here. And there's this property that the alpha squared and beta squared equals 1. And then the single qubit gate then becomes a transformation of such a qubit. And they are then represented by a 2 times 2 unitary complex matrix, as we saw on the previous slide, the Hadamard gate. And that just means that it's norm preserving and reversible, this idea that it's a unitary complex matrix. That means that there's a lot of gates you can write up, and here are some examples gates that are the X gate, the NOT gate, the Y gate and the C gate. They are called the Pauli gates, and then there's a Hadamard gate and the T gate down here, shown here as examples of unitary matrices that you can compute with. Now, to compose a system, we have this notion that now the state kind of explodes. So to represent 2 qubits, you would have a vector of 4 complex numbers, alpha, beta, gamma, and theta here. And then we can see that, and we still have this normalization condition here. And at a 3 qubit state, then we need 8 element complex vectors. And here we see that they usually use this Dirac notation here, specifying indices into where this is 1, this is a basis vectors shown down here in the case of using 3 qubits. And of course, when you start applying gates and so on, then these will not be just 0 or 1s. They will not be sparse. When you do something very, something where quantum is really doing something else than you could do for classical computing, then they will be kind of dense, complex numbers sitting in these states quite quickly for various algorithms, the Grover's algorithms and others, Shor's algorithm and so on. Very quickly they will be very dense. There are subsets of algorithms where you can model it much more efficiently. I won't go into this here. So how do we program these things? So here's a small gate language, so to speak, where we have gates and we have statements. The one thing you can do in such a language is that you have the different qubits here. Then you have the gates. You can apply a particular gate on some particular qubit. That is one kind of statement. Another thing is that you can swap a qubit with next qubit. So you swap q and q plus 1 in their interpretation, and that's sometimes needed to apply some of the some other gates. So here's a control gate. It will basically say that we are issuing gate G, conditioned that that we have the amplitude here for the. So here's an example of a control gate with 2 dots here. They're rooted here, and then in an X gate, meaning that if the amplitudes here are high, then this gate is performed. So that's kind of the idea of the notation, and that's specified using this control gate. Then you can have that you can put two statements in sequence, and then finally you also have a no operation gate, which can be used if you want to specify some certain kind of identities or so on. Now, looking at the circuit down here, you can write up the statement S0 down here, where that specifies basically the circuit. You can imagine writing up different statements that will specify the same circuit. As you can see, there are some possibilities of association possibilities between the statements, where you can flip them around if they operate on different qubits. So that means that there could be some algebra of making it possible to rearrange statements and still kind of give the same semantics. And we'll come back to the semantics in a moment. We see also here again that the various gate operations in the statements here, they are subject to gate fusion, as we already saw in the beginning. So how do we model these things? So one thing is that we can kind of create a big unitary matrix for the entire circuit, and then we can apply that huge unitary matrix to the incoming state vector. And that will be the main result of applying the entire circuit on an incoming state. Now it turns out that this unitary matrix is going to be quite big if we go about doing it that way. But this is still the way we want to specify the semantics of a circuit, is by doing it in using matrix multiplication from the horizontal composition, and then you use tensor product for vertical composition. And here's a definition of what a tensor product means. The Kronecker product is basically just specified using this block notation with various properties, of course, that there's an identity here. And then we have the special matrices that are used for specifying qubit swapping. So we have here a swap operation. You can see here that will have to operate on 2 qubits, the swap operation. And then we have some generalized identities, and then also the controlled operator down here, where you take any unitary matrix, and then you can put various controls on top. And that is basically defined as the identity on half of the unitary matrix, and then the unitary at the inner one, also using this block notation here. So this is pretty much old. This is how it would look if you look up in a textbook on quantum computing. Now we would like to give a semantics to the statements, right? So we would like to make sure basically that the implementation we do at the end will live up to some semantics. And here's the semantics using the notation we have also already seen. Gates are denoted by their corresponding matrices, complex matrices. So you see here what you see in here is, of course, the syntax for the gate in our small domain-specific language here, and then we have the complex matrices to the right. We then also see to give a denotation for a statement, we also parameterize it over the number of qubits that we work on. And there will always be this global kind of state vector, which is 2 to the k. That means that the complex unitary matrix that we are going to use as a denotation for the various statements, they will be c to the 2 to the k times 2 to the k. Okay, and we use then the tensor product to say that if you apply a gate operation on the qth qubit, you first apply the identity on the first q minus 1, and then the gate comes, and then the identity on the remaining qubits. This is how to read this. And we also see how you define the swap operation, the control operation, and when you do a sequence, you will have the matrix multiplication. We first perform S1. This is why it's here, and then we apply S2 to the result of that. Okay? Any questions at this point? Now the question is, of course, now we can evaluate a k-qubit circuit S on a state vector by just first computing giving the semantics, computing this huge unitary matrix, and then use matrix vector multiplication to compute the result, right? So the question is, can we do better than that? And obviously there's quite a lot of simulation frameworks around that do magic things, and they are doing better than this. They are operating imperatively on the global state vector by updating the various entries. So here we are going to take another approach. So let me first introduce Futhark, a data parallel array language with various array operations. It is kind of a rich flavored language with scans and reductions and all kind of operations at a data parallel level. But what we are going to use here is pretty much just map, and then the possibility for transposing a matrix, and also to flatten and unflatten operations. So those are basically the Futhark basic building blocks that we are going to use. So Futhark has this notion of size types, which means that we can see from the type the dimensions of the arrays that the operations work on. So for instance, for map here, it takes a function from alpha to beta, and then it takes an array of size n of alpha values, and returns again an array of size n with beta values. Right, so we can track the sizes in the type. For transpose, we can pretty much see that it will swap the two dimensions here. So it takes an array of size m times n, and returns an array of size n m. Now there's some special magic going on here with flatten and unflatten. It's not really magic; it has been worked out. And we use these kind of poor man's dependent types to deal with these kind of operations. So unflatten, for instance, will assume that it takes an argument which is specified as m times n. Syntactically, there needs to be m. It can be some expression, but it needs to be a multiplication of two size expressions, m and n, and it will then return an array of exactly by decomposing the multiplication and then constructing something of type m times n values. So that was the unflatten, and flatten works the other way around. So it takes a two-dimensional structure and a matrix, and then will basically create the flattened version of that with the outer 2 dimension being multiplied here. Okay, so we will see in the later slide. We can of course extend this thing ourselves, and in Futhark you can pretty much write a notion called vec for vectorization for vector, saying that here we take something of m times n, and then we produce something of n times m. Notice here that these sizes have been swapped here. This is equivalent to flatten composed with transpose. And similarly, you have the unvec operation, which is transpose composed with unflatten. So basically, where the flatten and unflatten work at rows, we have that vec and unvec work with columns. Now, Futhark targets.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
So how does have you considered extending it to higher dimensional arrays, such as the leading axis theory, where you can apply a function along an axis of a higher dimensional arrays in the same fashion you do with vec and vec?
I'm not really sure I completely understand the question. Just to say that for Futhark here, we are not allowed to have functions inside arrays. So in that sense, it's not higher order. It is higher order in the sense that it can be any arbitrary number of arrays. But in the sense that alpha here can be an array type again. So in that sense, it can be it can have multiple arbitrary many dimensions. It's not the case that it's rank polymorphic. It has some notion of rank polymorphism that can kind of at the surface level look like rank polymorphism, but it's not really defined. The inner working is not rank polymorphic. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah. More concretely, how would it? Well, you kind of answered it. It would generalize to higher dimensional arrays, right? This transpose these functions you listed here.
They work. It's just doing transpose is just doing with the outermost dimensions, right? It's not like in APL you have the generalized transpose where you can transpose at any arbitrary thing. You can write your own function that will do that to some down the ladder. But if it needs to be polymorphic, you will need to kind of stop at some point. If you see what I mean.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay, let me continue here with. Yes.
Somehow on the previous slide, is there a vec m and n times n alpha is somehow different than n times n?
Yes, and that's what I meant by that we have a syntactic property. It's not allowed for the so m times n is really different than n times m. And if you want to provide a witness that those two things are equivalent, you can have a small library of routines that will say that we trust these operations where you can give explicit evidence that you want to swap those things. Here, for instance, even though the numbers that are computed will be identical, unflatten will really operationally rely on the numbers m and n, right?
Sure.
So
I guess there are parameters to unflatten as well, right?
Yes,
M and N, yeah.
They are kind of implicit in that sense.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
So now to the notion that we can actually do better than first computing the huge matrix and then apply matrix vector multiplication. So we want to do this inductively for any statement S and integer k and state vector. We want to say that we can create an interpreter for states that immediately apply to a vector, and that needs to be the same. It needs to give the same result as if we first computed the semantics here, the huge matrix, and then applied that to V. But we want to do it without creating the vector, and we can do this using this vectorization and various properties of matrix multiplication. So here's the case for the vectorization property that one can look up at Wikipedia or something and get some reason why this works out. So here we see the vec and unvec operations in actions here. So I'm being a little bit sloppy with the notation here, but in particular we are not providing the sizes. But when you see that B needs to be possible to apply B to another matrix unvec of V, that will kind of define the size, the type of the result of unvec, which means that we can kind of infer that based on B. And then again, the other dimension is the A transpose also needs to be compatible. So with this rule and with these other rules about matrix multiplication, in particular this rule here that we can see a matrix multiplication as basically being the same as applying a mapping a function lambda v a dot v over a transpose matrix. This is identical to a matrix multiply. We can kind of calculate what it means to perform a gate operation. And we basically start by using the semantics here up here, and then we basically unroll, and we get this code down here where we say that this is equivalent to taking the vectorization. Damn! I thought that would happen. And then mapping this function over this this thing with this particular function. Okay, so that is the how you can calculate it. And similar calculation can be done for swap and control. Now for fusion, it turns out that we want to have the property that if you have two consecutive gate operations performed on the same qubit, that should basically be identical to if we have a gate that semantically is equivalent to multiplying those two, the semantics of those two gates, then we should be able to use that gate operation instead. So that means that we can basically calculate this result, and there's more information in the paper about this, how to actually get from this thing to this thing using the notion of map fusion. And you can see, of course, under the hood that you're really using the definitions down here, and that you see two map operations in here, and using those you can basically get to the result that the gate fusion is map fusion over index transformed matrices. Here's a Futhag library for gates that you can write. You can see the various gates here. I won't go into much detail due to time here, but there are various gate operations and so on. We can express various algorithms. Here's a notion of Grover's algorithms in Futhag specified using this gate library. We see here that there are some operations here, gate H and then gate X applied just after. Those are fused in the implementation using map fusion. And this is pretty much it. There's some notion of performance. I won't go into details here due to time, I think. And you can read more. We sometimes have a 10 times worse performance, but on GPUs. But other than that, and there are good possibilities for future work. Something we can look at to get performance even better. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. Unfortunately, we don't have time for any more questions. We already had two very good questions, I think. So I think we should switch to the next speaker. Perfect. Thank you again, Martin.